On today's episode of Selling Isn't Everything, you are in for a treat. Because Brent Adamson and I interview Dr. Rod Berger, an organizational psychologist, best-selling author, and master storyteller. What I loved the most about this episode is it wasn't just about the 5 steps to telling a great story or tricks and tips. Dr. Berger talks a lot about the stories we tell ourselves and how the stories we tell ourselves change how others perceive us, but most importantly, how we perceive ourselves. Take a listen. Better people make better salespeople, not the other way around.
What's hard about selling isn't selling, it's interacting with other people.
We can't take the glory for being great if we won't take the responsibility when we're not. What could we have done better?
Human connection can be the greatest source of strength, and I think that's pretty powerful.
Alrighty. So, Rob,
Brent, I'm going to let you kick this off, buddy. You are on.
Howdy, Rod. So I got all 1,000 questions for you, but you have made, at least recently, if not forever, a living on breaking down, understanding stories, storytelling, sharing stories with others around the world, talking about the power of stories. Maybe we start with that. Can you give our audience just a sense for like who you are and what you do would be helpful, just so everyone kind of knows where you're coming from?
Sure, yeah, and I'll do my best to do it in a timely fashion. It's great to be on
I
with
get
you
it.
guys.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. Here's what I'll say. Look, I mean, I could go through, I've got my doctorate in clinical psych. I have been professionally and personally curious since I was a little boy. And that has just really taken me down a path that is not something that's been, prescribed or something that somebody laid out for me early on. And so I'm a yes guy. I said yes in a lot of different arenas. I said yes at Vanderbilt's business school almost 2 decades ago and worked on storytelling and business with graduate students, and I've worked with so many different groups around finding their story. And then I've married that with the media. So I wrote with Forbes for a number of years, Entrepreneur Magazine, independent media projects that have taken me around the world. And really, by and large, Brent, I'm just a really lucky guy, right? I mean, I sort of turn around and I'm meeting, the late Pope Francis, or I'm sitting in Los Angeles interviewing Magic Johnson. Those are pinch me moments. I understand that. But it's all because I'm curious. And it all started when I was very young, hoping that my late father, who was born in Germany, and I can say it because I'm German, he was that he was that guy, right? There wasn't a lot said. There was a chill in the room, regardless of the HVAC system. And, he would come back from his travels with work. And I always, as a kid, I wanted to know, tell me about your trip, as he was unpacking. And he just really wouldn't share a lot. And so back then that was very frustrating, but I will tell you that it has probably been the fuel that has never left me, and has really supercharged my curiosity, wanting to know more, wanting to understand the nuance of people, and not what they're doing, I guess, publicly, but it's sort of that behind the scenes. It's the elevator that stops between 2 floors. That's what drives me in so many different ways. And so that led me to my book, which came out a few weeks ago, called The Narrative Edge: Authentic Storytelling That Meets the Moment. And now I'm here speaking with the two of you and about all that you
Congrats.
got and what I do.
That's amazing. All right. So how does being curious about the world lead to meeting the Pope? Tell me this. Tell me a story.
I mean, look, this is a classic example of anybody who knows me. I'm the kind that if I get an email, I open almost every email I get. Right.
Did you get an email from the Pope?
No, I didn't. I know. As I said that, I thought you were going to practice to say that. No,
Rod, I've been meaning to meet you.
No, I got introduced.
I heard you're curious. Okay.
I got introduced to somebody years ago, and I interviewed him. He had done work at Harvard, and so I was interviewing him about sort of his story. We become friends. 2 years later, we find out that not only do we get along for several sort of professional reasons, but he grew up where I grew up. It's just that I'm older than he is, and he went to the competing high school. Had no idea. I thought he was from Boston. And so still friends with him, and he connected me with the Refugee Migrant Education Network. And long story short, I got a phone call, and there was a seminar on the refugee crisis in Rome. And I found myself in Rome with UNHCR officials, and
Cool.
And all of a sudden, there with the Pope. So again, it's just saying yes. That's how my first trip to Africa happened. I said yes to an email on a late Sunday that I thought was spam from a very famous publicist that I thought, I know that name. This can't be real. It was real. And a few weeks later, I was on my way to Dakar, Senegal, to understand
Cool.
child marriage, deep inside Senegal. So,
So put me in the room with the Pope. I'm just curious because it's actually super cool. So are you? Is
yeah,
it a small room? Is it a big room? Is it the entire cathedral? Are you one of 100 people? Is it just you and him? Or are you like,
no,
what do you
it's a
do? What are you feeling? What are you smelling? What are you tasting? What are you hearing? Like, walk me through it.
well, it's a surreal experience because I
Right?
will tell you that I was shocked that he was at 23 that I
Um,
was with the Pope. I was shocked at his frailty physically.
mm,
That was something that
yeah,
we do not see, and to see somebody and look, this
yeah,
was something. It takes me back to my days in psychology. Like observing somebody's gait is like the first tip off, just to understand sort of where they're coming from when you would first, meet somebody that you might be working with and engaging in a clinical intake.
yeah,
His gait was so there was such. I mean, it was brittle. His gait was brittle, is the best way to put it.
yeah.
And so it was really shocking to see that up close. And I don't know why that was, but look, that environment itself, I think there are moments in life where the energy in the room is just incredible, right?
Did you get to exchange words? Like, what do you
Yes,
say to
yeah,
the
yeah.
Pope?
I will
Yeah.
tell you the
Like, what's going through your
I don't know
head?
if I've shared this.
Yeah,
Well,
go
I'll
ahead.
tell you what was going through my head was I had just, and I don't know why, and I think it was just the moment, right? I talk about meeting the moment, but in that moment, I thought about a friend of mine in England that I
Uh-huh.
had collaborated with, and we'd become friends. And I had
Mhm.
found out from him, I'd just seen him, and that his wife, very young, had cancer, and it did not look
Mm,
good. And for
yeah,
whatever reason, that was weighing very heavy on my heart, so much more than trying to figure out how am I going to get quotes and sound bites for my article on the larger picture
sure.
and the challenges of refugees. Right, we've never had so many refugees um, across our planet, and so that was really what was driving me. And that was the very first thing that I said to him is that I wanted, I wanted to extend it to sort of breathe her name into the presence of him. That was
Yeah.
really what was lying sort of very heavy, within me.
Actually, I was curious, and my as Brent well knows, I am the daughter of an immigrant. My parents, my mother and her mother escaped Nazi Germany, were Jewish, and my mother at 91 is still an advocate for all refugees. And I'm curious. You said that you grew up curious, and then you pivoted and met the Pope. And really, from everything I've read about you, you're on a mission. You are very mission driven. This isn't story selling, storytelling, to tell a story in corporations to make a ton of money. I don't see you as somebody who's like, hey, let me tell you how to make more money using stories. That you have a real mission to help immigrants. And I'm curious what happened in your past, or perhaps as you got older, that drew you so much to that cause, because it feels like that mission is what has opened doors for you, if I'm hearing this correctly.
No, sure. You're dead on, and I'd love to extend the conversation even past the past our interview because of your background and your family's background. I would think that there would be some really interesting layers there, and common themes. I look, as a young boy, a desperate need for his father to pay attention to him, I think, played a role, and the mystery. Sometimes we fill in gaps, right? So, and I love that you said I really appreciate it, and it's I guess to my own professional detriment that I want to I'll share with you my publisher Wiley and sort of the conversation that happened that resulted in the book. Um, but sometimes I think when we don't get answers or we're not privileged in that moment to be able to experience whatever that story is from that individual. It could be a parent, spouse, friend, whatever it is, a child. I think we fill in the gaps a little bit. And there was such mystery
Yes.
with a man that was so much older than my friends' dads, right? When I was at preschool, I vividly remember looking out the window with a teacher. I see my dad arriving to pick me up, and they say, "Oh, it looks like your grandfather's here." And I thought, one, please don't say that to him because as his personality, he's not going to take too kindly to that. And two, I knew already I was different, right? And I wasn't even in formal school. I'm just in preschool. So there was such curiosity. And yet I think I'll say this for myself. I don't even know if it's gender specific in this regard, but there's this there was this deep desire in me to understand Like it's like you start to paint yourself as almost like a hero or a villain, or you're like a superhero. Like there are all these adventures, right? Like my favorite books were Choose Your Adventure as a kid. Like I just loved not having to be told to go down one path. It was like, well, if I go to page 54, Brent and I are going to scale Mount Everest. But if we go, to page 76, maybe we're going deep sea diving or something, Sherry. And I've got to pick and choose, right? So I've always had that in me. But yeah, mission driven. And I will tell you, we were approaching the landing in Senegal, in Dakar. I'd never been to the continent. I will never forget, and I write about this in the book, I'll never forget looking down at a landscape that was foreign to me. It might as well have been another planet. And I just made a decision. It was like, I'm not going to do this for anybody as a way to, in essence, serve somebody else's purpose. I'm going to write, I'm going to tell and share stories that are emotive. Some might call them poetic, that there's a bit of a rhythm to them, because that's how I feel. And if I do that, then I'm at least being authentic to myself. And the response was great from people, and mostly a lot of men that would send me notes saying, because I started daily journals that I would publish when I was in Africa. And it was like, Rod, I know it's this time, but I'm waiting for your next entry. When are you going to share that? And so that forever changed me. That forever changed me to see people in different positions and to understand that I'm walking into an environment and there are biases that come with that. Like I've had the experience of young African children seeing me in person as a white face that they've never experienced before. And no one would put that on a bucket list, but I will tell you that if anyone's had that experience that's listening or watching to us, where someone is seeing you and you are the first person they have seen that represents something, that is life change. That is a moment between two humans that you can't script. And if you tried to in Hollywood, I don't know if you could replicate that and provide that energy that sort of jumps off of the page of life. I've had those experiences. And so when I come back, going to Bed Bath and Beyond and Trader Joe's and like going to Disney World just doesn't have the same impact as a cultural experience that is rich in history, in the unknown or the untold. Like those are the things that drive me. So you are absolutely, dead on in the way that I think that it is really very mission driven. And when Wiley reached out to me, I took a professional risk, Sherry. They said, "Look, we've been wanting to talk with you. Storytelling is the number one topic that we're getting requests for, and we think you could do something interesting based on your travels." And I just said to them, because I had nothing to lose, I said, "If you're looking for a book that's going to teach somebody like the 5 ways to tell a better story, I am not your guy. That's not me." And they said, No, you do you," which was an incredible thing to hear because I had free reign to integrate in, hopefully in a way that resonates with audiences, that I am as fallible as anybody. And I can't sit here and tell you that one way is better than another because it's all in authenticity, how people experience you. Like Sherry, when I look at your work on stage and the energy that you bring, right? That's you. And by being you, people are going to want to connect, right? That's the art, that's selling it. But that even sort of cheapens it in that regard, right? You're connecting. It's about connection. And if I can connect in my way and you connect in your way and Brent in his way, then I think we're doing a pretty good job of attracting positive momentum between people. So yeah, I'm very mission driven in that regard. And I always want to be a part of stories that have some purpose, right? Like I repel at this inauthentic sort of synthetic market this, do this, pitch that, it's just, and I think in a world of AI where we're backsliding, we're not prepared. And that's the benefit of interviewing over 4,000 people all around the world, that I have some really interesting friends that live in interesting places that are in very interesting boardrooms. So I get information that is fascinating to me, stirs my imagination, but also makes me very cautious when I look at the world around me. Or when I'm at the scores table last night at a middle school basketball game for my son, wondering what's going on for this next generation. Are we preparing them, or are we all just sort of blindly ignorant to what's going on and we're not going to be prepared? So to me, story lives and breathes within all of that.
Yeah, I've been saying for a long time that to me, AI can replicate a lot. AI can spin out content and tools and frameworks, but AI can never take our story. And that story really is the advantage in a time of AI. because our story is our story. And I'm curious, I want to pivot a little bit to your work in corporate America, because we've got an audience of sales leaders, CROs that listen to this podcast. And it almost seems to me, from what I've read about you and just what I'm hearing now, that your mission-driven work that you do in Africa and other parts of the world and with the Pope drives this idea, tell me if I'm wrong, in corporate America to create culture and connection. And I'm curious, how do you do that when you're in a company, particularly in a company today where, marketing is siloed from sales and from ops and people don't talk to each other and they blame each other and they point fingers. How are you using story as a unifying mechanism or tool, or do you call it something different?
No, it's a great question. I'll give you sort of 2 points of entry here. So one would be, I think it was a Wall Street Journal on December 12th, I think, came out with an article about corporate America is looking for storytellers. In essence, they're sort of cobbling together PR, marketing, Marcom, and saying that's not working because traditional media, in large part, and this is not a soapbox, but it's really been converted into paid media in so many different ways in which the general public would not know. And that's challenging for folks that are trying to get their information out there. They're trying to acquire new customers, keep new customers, right? So storytelling it used to be a nice to have or well, that's interesting to wait a minute, we have to find form and function within a corporate setting. The other element in that is that I've had, and this, I don't know if this will surprise you. I'd be very curious. I've had over the last couple of years, several CEOs or C-level, let's call them C-level professionals that have reached out to me back channel and asked me, could I help them understand first their story and then be there with them as they unpack it to see how that then tags in to their legacy and or what they plan to do starting, let's say, tomorrow in a greater sense. That tells me that we are starting to recognize that while we maybe were serviced well by press releases and sort of data points, it doesn't stick. And so, it's funny because years ago, and I remember someone asked me point blank, was like, why do you do that? And I was like, I don't know, it was my gut, just a gut reaction. I have told people across my 4,000 interviews, in essence, if you want me to ask you questions that I could then source the answers from a press release that your company has put out, then that's not going to be, I won't be the person to interview you. Because to me, that's lazy storytelling in that regard, right? I want to understand the person behind that because that to me is why people, millennials, I mean, like the research is, vast on why young people or the generation on the come pick a place to work and to commit their time. Right. And that's what we're really talking about. And so I've seen it individually with professionals that are saying, I've got to understand my story. I cannot hide behind my board and or the board can't hide behind the CEO who may be charismatic, but it's all around data points and lacking substance. People want to find their purpose, right? You really, what you were talking about with me is purpose over profits. I think that mirrors the generation that is actively in corporate America and really sort of the corporate world. And so storytelling is becoming that significant for people. They want to understand it. It's like, so I think I've reached out to the reporter at the Wall Street Journal and just said, I'm fascinated that you've had this interest. And she said her mailbox from across the world has been flooded because she was dead on what she found, what she reported on, is they're looking for basically chief storytellers. People that can say, no, we have to understand. Like what kind of, what's the ambiance? It's like a school
Well, it's
play.
also the number one keynote. It's the one of 5 top keynote topics today, according to Speakers Bureau. So
Is that right?
you're in the right
know.
place at the right time. Yeah.
Do you guys ever worry? And Shari, this is much a question for you. But Rod, let's start with you're our guest. So I'd love to get your take on this, because this is what I do for a living, right? So as well. So I've actually called myself a chief storyteller many different times in my career, but there's a dark side to storytelling. And in many ways, the dark side to storytelling is, in fact, is where we start, which is we all acknowledge just how incredibly powerful stories are and how memorable they are and how unifying they can be and how authentic they can be. But there's the dark side is the fact that stories can be used to manipulate. Stories can be used to create realities that are not true. Stories can be used to actually create alternative realities. Stories can be used to tear people apart as much as they can be used to bring people together. We don't have to look any further than our own country right now to see two very different stories that are derived from the exact same underlying reality. And those stories are actually polarizing. And so I don't know, Rod. I don't really have even a question or specifically, and certainly no answer. But I do wonder, as we all three of us sort of think of ourselves as storytellers, it's like one of these with great power comes great responsibility sorts of points, right? And so, Rod, do you think about this? Do you think about like the sort of the downside, the dark side of the power of storytelling, and what do you do with that?
I do, and I take it very seriously. I think of it as a responsibility, but that's an odd word to use in this context because
Yeah,
it might mean that I'm trying to say that there's some level of ego or success. My approach is better than some, and I don't mean it in that regard. What I mean is that I think story is not to be taken lightly, like the concept of story and storytelling, right? And
Mhm.
we can flippantly do it now, or we can throw it into a chatbot or into some AI engine and just think that we can spit out something that is going to be compelling and influence people, because that's ultimately what people, I think, are attempting to do. But I do think it's a great responsibility. But this is where
But
it
it's
goes
not even
back
that
to.
because it's not like I could throw it into chat. But let's say I'm a world class storyteller. But what, if essentially if you're a world class storyteller, you are really, really good at getting people to think, believe, feel certain things, right? It's like if I use this word versus that word, I can actually move them emotionally from this place to this place. So my background is linguistics. And while I'm certainly not trained in it, I'm not sure I ever want to be, you get into things like neuro-linguistic programming and NLP stuff, right? And there's this real dark side to the NLP stuff, which is it becomes, on a cynical side, it becomes straight up manipulation.
Oh yeah,
And so,
you're
so
exactly
that's
right, Brent. I mean,
that's
look.
where it gets really interesting. It's like
Yeah.
this really question, like, how are we thinking about these? So I think one is we have to be very responsible as storytellers, but two, I think we need to equally train people to critically engage with stories such that that they are not susceptible to this sort of easily to this superpower of, wow, that was really emotional. I've got a little tear in my eye and I'm going to do whatever you say. Because just the images you created were so powerful, even if they were completely divorced from reality.
Don't you think, Brent,
That's the,
the
yeah.
format is important within what you're saying? The context of
Tell me more. What do you mean?
meaning if we're all going to produce a movie, right? We're sort of picking our frame, and this is
Yeah.
like a Christopher Nolan flick. Like even my 11-year
Yeah.
old, she understands now. Like, okay, Dad, that feels like a Christopher Nolan. Like the feel of it, the sensibility of it,
Yeah.
right? The color and everything. Um, and in that, we're staking sort of our position, our perspective. But if I'm speaking
Yeah.
on stage with Sherry, or you and I are providing a seminar, we're doing something, Brent. I think that within those environments, I think it's important to share the questions that we have in our mind that either got us to the position that or the perspective that we are now sharing, and or the ongoing questions. I mean, sometimes I think it's just
Yeah.
that sounds like such a throwaway, but it's funny because to me, and I've been speaking since I was 16, I found that in those moments where I actually shared, in essence, how I came to a conclusion or
Yeah.
the struggle, that's
Yeah.
the point of connection. Like that's the train stop. Like that's when the train stopped and we all got on together and then sort of shared in that collective energy within a given room.
There's this question of intention. Like, what's your intent in telling a story? And then there's a certain humility too, which is your point too, which is this sort of like, I'm not an expert, but so you can present a story as a story, or you can present a story as almost like a reflection, right? So it's like, here's one way to think about it. Here's an experience I've had. Here's kind of how I interpret. But to essentially invite your audience in to co-construct the story with you, as opposed to simply receive it, seems to me this really powerful act of humility that then turns the story into a collaborative act, as opposed to storytelling. It's sort of story collaboration, which then seems to then diminish this risk of just using storytelling as a superpower that just overwhelms people and just bends them to a certain perspective.
I think the pressure test of that is, and, I went into this broadly, but the greatest compliment that I've gotten thus far with the book,
Mm,
whether it's someone I know or that I have not met at all in my life, is I'm getting this response which says, I find myself reading your chapters, and at some point in the chapters, I insert myself and a
yeah,
story that seems to resonate. That at least tells me that even if I only sell 5 copies, that that I'm inviting people in
Yeah.
So there's a difference. This goes back to what, Sherry, you were talking about in the beginning, this notion of like, I'm just marketing, like do these 5 things and you'll be a better storyteller, right? That I think people, they can see through that, right? They can see through that. And so I do think, but there's probably no great answer. And to your point, I'd love to hear, Sherry, what you think, but
Yeah,
I think
please.
it's something, it's like tying a string around your finger. Like you have to remember that as you're going so that it doesn't come across as, look, I'm the all-knowing. I'm telling you how to do that. To me, it's all based in questions, right? It's that
Mm.
curiosity, asking questions, and I think also respecting your audience. How many times do you hear a speaker and you think, if I'm feeling cynical today and I haven't had my coffee, I don't think that they that they sort of respect their audience in the way in which they respect their own opinion. And that I think is dangerous and irresponsible.
I do think we have responsibility as storytellers, and to have clear, authentic intent. And I like what you said about showing them how we came to that conclusion, because then they can make their own conclusion. Does that resonate with me? But the first thing I thought of when you said that, Brent, like, isn't this diabolical? Like, can't we use stories for evil? And we're
Yeah.
probably all from the same generation. Do you remember Don Adams on Get Smart?
Of course.
You remember that show, 99? And he used to say something all the time, if only he could have used his energy for good instead of evil. Remember that? Like, or if only he could have used his talent for good instead of evil. And I think it's the same with storytelling. And I think people will take any skill and use it for good or evil, depending on who they are. And we're not going to change that. And I also think I want to wrap this around it. I don't see storytelling as separate from human conversation and even human existence for that matter. We are so wired for story that, as Rod just said, if we don't put it in a framework for the audience, they will do it themselves. They will fill in the blanks because we think in terms of if then. We make up stories. That's why in a company, if we don't tell someone the truth of a situation or the whole situation, we just say there's going to be a change, there's all this back channel gossip and upset because we start making up stories in the absence of information. So what I'm getting at, Brent, in answer to your question,
Yeah.
couldn't we use it for evil? We can use anything for evil. I can use a knife to cut a fish, or I can use a knife to stab you in the heart. And so
Oh
we
God,
can't
it got dark.
control. Story is just integral to who we are as a human race. And
Oh, 100%. Right.
um,
But it's a half step away from propaganda, isn't it?
oh yeah,
The right. So the thing that so one this something you guys both said is actually intriguing to me, which is storytelling as broadcasting is probably dead on arrival, right? But I think that's what a lot of people think of when they think of storytelling is how do I convey this story out to the world? Oftentimes when I work with people on storytelling, I'll ask them, who's the story about? And they'll say it's about this person, it's about me or my experience or about this other person I'm talking about. It's like the story is really about your audience, right? It's creating a vessel that they can put themselves into and then make better sense of their world through the imagery that you're sharing is kind of the way I think about it. But if you use sort of storytelling as a cudgel, that's no longer really that isn't no longer this collaborative act, is it? It's more of a control. Storytelling is an act of control rather than an act of collaboration. I don't know, Rod. I don't know if you thought about all this or if you think about
that's
this. But
really
I just,
dark, Brent. I think
it
that's
is dark,
very
isn't it?
dark.
Yeah, but
No, but you know what? It's
I-
true though.
have you seen the
Yeah.
news? I mean, like
Well,
literally, right?
yes, yes. I mean,
Yeah.
we're going to date the podcast, and Chris is going to throw an egg at me. But right? We just
I
had
don't know
the
that you need to
shooting.
date. It's literally the news for the
I
last
mean,
5
yes,
years,
we had a
right?
shooting in Minnesota, and you've got both
Yeah.
sides telling such a different story.
Right.
And yes, that is manipulation. But that, to me, that's a conversation about news and media and social media,
Yeah.
and it that is a shame because what's happening is because we're so polarized. Yes, we're falling into two camps of what does this story mean.
Yeah.
But I want to get back to the sweetness of what Rod was saying at the beginning, because I'm happier there. And the sweetness of making a difference with these refugees and in companies. And I am curious because you said something that was interesting. You said, I don't have the 5 steps. I don't have the 3 steps. I miss 5 steps, by the way. So thank you very much. I do like structure because I find that particularly in my work when I'm working with sales leaders and and CEOs to tell their stories and salespeople, that their stories can get too long. Like they can get 26 minutes and nobody has the bandwidth for that today, that they kind of need some sort of a structure. And please prove me wrong here, Rod. I want to
No,
hear
actually, what I think to me, it's about the application of that, right? So I completely agree with you. If you're plugging in, like I had a conversation earlier today with a professional in India, and they're asking me to now convert sort of apply my book and storytelling to this world around health and wellness and meditation, right? So this is just about the approach. So I completely agree. If I'm talking to folks in a business school or sales professionals, I have to understand that they're going to need organizing principles to apply my concepts into their world. But it's about how do I come up with what's in here? And am I doing it from a sort of this 5-step process? Or am I sort of bringing in all the ingredients? Then you can choose and take those ingredients and apply those to the meal you want to serve your base of customers or your potential customers or your market. So that I'm glad you brought that up so that just I could be clear on that, right? So it's the way in which it's like the origin story, right? Because
And
you're
aren't there
right.
universal truths like, when we've got a villain, the story is better and the audience needs to be the hero? Or is that so yesterday?
I mean, I don't know if it's yesterday. I mean, look, we talk of sort of story structure. I love when I see people who look at story structure, if we're using that sort of term loosely, and they just kind of bring their own spin on it, as if to say, like a basic example of that would be like 10 years ago, they started coming out saying, oh, nobody reads long form content. It's short form, right? And I'm sitting there because I read and I listen to podcasts in all different sort of backgrounds, countries, sectors, because I like to learn. And I love words, spoken and written. And I kept thinking to myself, why is it that the top sort of performers in these different domains, it's all around long form content, It's just like, so I don't know if structure, I mean, I think it can feel good to say we're going to structure it and there's a hero and there's a protagonist, there's a villain, right? Here's the arc of the story. Sometimes I think we need to look at things from a different angle, right? It's Dead Poets Society, stand on top of the desk. What do you see? And I just think that can impact people in a different way. But look, story too, so many of these people that say like, well, they're so structured, they're like over structured. It's like, I love to say to them, and I talked about this, and people kind of think, aha. And it's like, you don't need story until you need story, right? The minute you get pulled over for speeding, you're thinking about what's your story, right? When you're a little kid, okay, if little Brent walks in and now I see half the cookies are gone, even at a young age, he's coming up with a story. At that stage, a story. If you're going on a first date or a blind date, you're walking into that establishment going, in essence, how am I going to portray myself? Right? I am telling a story by the way in which I enter that environment, the way I sit down, what I order, the first question. That's my story. So we can say it's like, oh, that's nice to have. Now, we all love story here, the three of us. But a lot of times people will think, well, yeah, but that's too unwieldy, right? I need things that I can package together. That's fine. But once you're more aware that your story is across your entire day, it never like turns off, you then can apply it and go, okay, how does that then, because how do I impact people? If I'm a CEO, do I just throw data points at people or do I say what the data means? Like, no. The data should be the starting point. That's like my fingers hitting the keyboard now what results from that, right? So I think it's the way in which we apply these lessons that make the most impact for people.
I'm just running through like an inventory of tools that I use in storytelling, and they kind of resonate, or they correspond to, Rod, what you're talking about. But oftentimes this a quick technique that's in the frame making sale book that we just published. But is that when you share a story, I always, when I coach people on this, it's like I coach them on like there's two things you want to accomplish simultaneously. Is one, I want my audience to know something, but I want my audience to feel something. Right. And so you can kind of go through and think, all right, what is it that I want them to know? The information, whatever it is. And this, by the way, I live in the world, right? Exactly what you're talking about. So my storytelling has been based on data and bar charts for the better part of 25 years. Right. And so when you show someone a bar chart, there's like, well, here's or a graph. Here's what's on the x-axis. Here's what's on the y-axis. Here's what this, so there's information. There's, and as you notice, this one goes up and that one goes down. And look, if they meet in the middle, it's a marginal cost, marginal revenue, or whatever it is, right? This is the market clearing price. I'm not even sure what all that meant, but I think it meant something. I remember vaguely from economics. But then there is, and when I used to train storytellers, I'd always ask them, okay, that's all the stuff you want your audience to know, but what do you want your audience to feel? And generally the question is like, what do you mean? And I would always say, well, is this exciting? Is it scary? Is it surprising? Is it confusing? Is it off-putting? What's the emotion you're trying to generate in your audience as you share this story? And then we usually talk about it and settle on something like, well, this is actually kind of surprising because it's an unexpected outcome. All right, so okay, now give me 5 words that describe surprise in some fashion. Surprising, unexpected, and we'd write them out on a whiteboard and they say, now explain this graph to me one more time. But as you explain the graph, use 3 of those 5 words. And it was always interesting because we do this as what we called master classes. And so we were like small groups of 6 or 7, and everyone would always look around after we do those exercises and say, what did you just do? And I said, I didn't do anything. And they said, what did they just do? And I said, they didn't do it. They began to convey not just what you want them to know, but what you want them to feel. They started making an emotional connection. And I think this is going back, Shari, to your question about techniques and rules and 5 steps. If there's one thing I found that works, that really turbocharges your storytelling, is to think about the emotional connection and use the language of emotion as much as the intellectual connection, if that makes sense. I don't know, Rod, if that's something you've thought about before, but I would imagine you just do it instinctively because it just happens naturally for you.
That's very kind of you to say. No, I do absolutely think about that. So it took me back to working at Vanderbilt's business school, right? So I'd be working with these graduate students who, let's say 65% of them, 70% of them are there because family legacy and, let's say, accounting, valuation, these sorts of things, right? They want to start their own firm or go to a McKinsey or whatever. And so part of my initial work would be to understand their motivation and their fear for being there, with the purpose of they were in an accelerated program. And the sooner that they found sort of like-minded people in the room without feeling like they had to sort of posit that they were better, smarter, more accomplished, or more valuable to a firm than the person next to them or on either side, the better. And what was fascinating is it's sort of doing the same thing that you're talking about, but it's like, why am I here and why do I want to, in essence, move forward? And to find those commonalities, what was interesting was they would sort of collect around the fear or the emotion, right? Like, is accounting going to be around in 10 years? Am I going to sort of get a return on my investment here at this very expensive but notable school around the world? That's a fear that's central to their story. And for me, I interpret that as until they can sort of voice that and understand that, one, they're not alone, their motivations are going to be impacted or influenced in a way that may not take them on the path that they ultimately want to be on. Right. And so this is why it's like take education for an example. So the classic example of, principal's going to call the staff in and they're going to have this meeting. Right. And they walk away frustrated because it's like, we're doing, okay, one more new initiative, just sort of, it becomes white noise. And why? Because you find out that, and this happens in corporate America too, it never started with what's the implication on everybody in this room, right? Like, help me understand, like, let's clear those components up. Let's understand how my work, my contribution adds to the value or the goal that we are now setting forth on this journey. And when we don't do that, you lose people. It's out of the gate, you lose them. And so this kind of goes back to that conversation about the responsibility of a storyteller. I think that part of it is being a conductor of sorts to understand the pace, the rhythm, the power of breath and voice. Like we were talking about sort of the propaganda and some of the cynical stuff, right? The darker side of it. Look, I remember back in my training in clinical psychology, when you're working with young boys, right, in schools, to hear a deeper, louder voice in a moment when they need to be sort of diverted away from whatever that behavior is actually works. Because they hear you at a different decibel level. Not that you're yelling at them, but it's basically telling their brain, aha, Brent's trying to capture my attention while I'm screwing around here in class or whatever's going on that's not really productive or functional for me within this organized setting. So there is great power in that. And so that's where I've always equated writing and storytelling to being a musician, Like there's a rhythm. When you talk to a publisher, a lot of times people will reach out and say, "Hey, Rod, how did you get a publisher? I'm thinking about that." You're right, which I love that people are they're interested in sort of sharing their experiences and their expertise. I say to them, look, one of the first questions they're going to ask you is, "Have you found your voice?" Or tell me about voice, because that's the kind of thing that jumps off of a page for a reader. Like when someone has their voice. And when you don't have your voice, whether you're speaking, you're sharing a story, or you're conducting a board meeting and running a board meeting, again, people know it. It's like when you hear a song for the first time, like something inside you says, there's something about this that is catchy, right? I mean, that's the power of advertising. And sometimes less is more. So that's what I love about it. It's like, it's a sequence. It's you're moving people, and it's such a rhythmic experience. So
Agreed.
right? I mean, this is why, as an example, Steve Kornacki, who was doing all the work on then MSNBC and NBC for the election coverage, they moved him over to NBC Sports because the way in which he communicates data and trends and forecasting, here's a percentage of your team making the playoffs. The way he does it makes you feel as if he's right there in the room with you and he's your neighbor.
That's so interesting you say that. I always said that the male bonding that happens when watching football or the NBA, to me, what they're really doing is they're not just watching the game and the stats, they're sharing values. Oh, did you know he grew up in a poor neighborhood? And then, he left his wife, and it's sort of like
right.
how people, really, and I think more men than women share their actual values through the stories of the players. It's never just the game.
Because
Right?
there's
It's
safety, right? There's safety in
it's the
that.
story, yes, and it's women do that probably more naturally. But I love what you're saying, and heard a couple of things that I just wanted to point out that you said that really hit me. And one of those is you're not only focused on structure, you're focused on delivery. Because there's writing the song, and then there's performing the song, and the voice, and the pause, and both are obviously equally important in the power of a story. But the other theme that I hear from you, that is really beautiful, that I haven't heard a lot from people who call themselves storytellers, is this idea, it's not just the stories we tell, it's not just the stories we share, but that you're really helping people with the stories they tell themselves to be better humans. I mean, am I hearing that correctly?
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
It goes sort of back to that school play, it's because at least in the West or here in the US, it's that notion of the stage in an elementary school that shares space with a cafeteria. And, maybe you get thrown into a school play in third grade or whatever it is that you have to do, and you're playing the oak tree. And that's one of those first experiences of saying, oh, that person has a better story or is better at telling us. Like, it's understanding our life within this context of the people that I share a stage with and those that are watching me in my environment or that I would like to get to know. And I think that over time, I think the best storytellers are those that are vulnerable enough to sit within the story, their own story that probably doesn't have answers. In essence, there's you can't just say, well, this is how it's going to end, right? You just don't know. And I think that's some of the most powerful, right? And the funny thing is after we've experienced it's all relative, right? But some level of trauma, a breakup, a divorce, losing a game in school, whatever it is, those are those moments where this is what, I mean, think about it. Now, I'm dating myself along, I think probably with the two of you as well. It's sort of, you're a kid and someone breaks up with you or something happens and you go and you listen to music, you listen to like love songs about, how you can't go on anymore. It's like you're in a point of, that's an intersection of vulnerability and an opportunity to understand how that narrative impacted you, and also what role did you play? That's the hardest thing for people to answer in relationship. What role did I play? Much easier to say, Brent, you put me in this position, you know what I mean, at work, and I know we're colleagues, but I'm pointing at Brent because it keeps the focus away from my understanding of myself. Right. So Brent, we can talk about that off air about how you did that to me. No.
Yeah.
But I
There's
do
a lot
think
of
that
truth.
finding
Yeah.
ourselves and the story of ourselves is paramount to being a better, more connected parent, to being a better leader, to understand. It's like there's an individual in Stockholm who I have become friends with and worked with. And you know what he found out? He's really good at being number two. Like he's really, really good at that role. Yet we're all it doesn't matter if you're in the Nordics or if you're in the US. It's like, yeah, but you're supposed to be number one. You're supposed to be the CEO. And it was like, he's so valuable in the spot that he is, in the way in which he works with organizations of all shapes and sizes. And I find that to be an incredible narrative and a twist on it, right? But it's because he understands more of
Because he knows
himself.
his story. He knows his own
Right. He knows his
story.
story. That's right.
Well, let me ask you, so we're winding down now, and then Brent and I are going to talk behind your back for 8 minutes. And
Well,
all
8.
good things.
There, I didn't know it was 8 minutes.
Exactly
Very
8.
specific.
Yeah, that was very specific.
Yes. And I'm not even German. But at any rate, that was teasing both of you. Actually, I guess I am half German. That is not so. That is the truth. How do people get a hold of you? And it will obviously put your book in the show notes.
Okay.
Is it best to email you, reach out on LinkedIn? I know you work with companies, with teams, with individuals. You're obviously very mission driven. How do people find you?
Well, thank you. I mean, they can go to drrodberger.com. They can send me an email, rod@drrodberger.com. I'm on LinkedIn all the time, so feel free to do that. Also Instagram. And then I won't single out one, but I'm with most of the major speaker bureaus. And if that's of interest to you, I mean, feel free to reach out to representation there. But yeah, I'm excited about, and I can say this now I'm now in talks with Wiley to write a companion guide to this, so that it allows you, once you've sort of centered and sort of, I think, sat within this book, right, to then apply it to your life, both personally and professionally. So I'm available everywhere. I try to be public in that regard. And I love when people have questions. It's not about, in essence, selling in that regard. I love when people just send me a note and say, this is something that moved them. Here's a question that they have, because I know I've benefited greatly by those who have contributed their story, even when I didn't know that I could ask for it, or they did it of their own volition and kindness.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much
Awesome,
for
Rod.
your time.
Thank you, guys.
Great.
Really appreciate it.
All right. Cheers, Rod.
Cheers. So, Brent, what are your thoughts after listening, talking, and observing our wonderful guest, Rod?
Well, I mean, it's interesting to me, Shari, because I have given so much thought to storytelling, both sort of officially, like how do you actually unpack this, and just doing it, and sort of think about how do I not really think about storytelling, but how do I just convey ideas in a compelling way? How do I speak more, in a more motivational way? How do I take really complex ideas and impart them on people? So I guess you think about it, that's all kind of storytelling in some fashion or other. And I've developed all sorts of tips and tricks and ideas that seem to work for me. But the thing that I find really interesting about it, and I maybe y'all thought I just got too dark, but I think it's a real question, which is, as you get better and better at it, it becomes a bit of a superpower, and you actually have to start to be kind of careful about your ability as a storyteller. I think a lot of people maybe, or this is not something they think about because they're just don't feel that they're that good at storytelling to begin with. But it's kind of Rod's point. We all tell stories all the time. We tell stories to ourselves. And by the way, I think you made such a powerful point that really kind of caught me off guard. It's like, oh God, she's right. Which is, if it's not just that storytelling can become manipulative or dark, or it can have negative consequences for external audiences. We mentioned propaganda. It can the same truth can be for yourself, can't it? Which is like, you really caught me off guard with that point. It's like, the stories we tell ourselves can be just as self-destructive as they can be detrimental to the world if you're not careful.
I mean, more so, I think about this all the time. Like you go out as a couple, right, with your spouse, and you've heard all of their stories, right? Like you've all heard all of each other's stories. And like, I know when somebody asks my husband a certain question, like I can tell his story.
Here he goes.
And then we all, like, when we're in a social setting, maybe we've got, some form of virtue signaling. Because if you think about why we tell stories in public, very often we're doing it to, accelerate our own position in the social group, right? Like, I'm going to tell this because, oh yes, I give back, because how couldn't I? I feel so fortunate. Like that, there's that story, right? Then there's the, the victim story. And whatever it is, I do think it's very useful for us as humans to stop and look at not the stories we tell professionally so much, because these will affect those, but I think it's very beneficial to go back and say, what stories do I tell in different situations? Why am I telling them? Do they serve me? And do they serve the other person? Or am I really just looking for validation for my own darkness and insecurity? Now that's dark.
And I was with you through the word validation, and
Well,
my own validation.
because we do
Yeah.
that. Because we all do
Yeah.
that. Let's be honest.
Yeah, 100%.
Right?
This is
Like
very human.
the story about how I was wronged, you know,
Mm.
and it's the victim story, which
Mm.
none of us are immune to, right? This happened and then they took that. And it's like, why am I telling that story? Nobody wants to hear it. It's not
Mm.
furthering but again, I think that's the point, is that we really need to look at the stories we tell, and you can reframe any story. And I believe that when we reframe our stories, we change our lives because it's that powerful.
So you as you crystallize something for me, that is really interesting how you said that. So we, just like we did just now with Rod, and you can tell he naturally gravitates there because he's wrote a book on it, right? That we tend to focus on storytelling in terms of the mechanics. How do you tell a compelling story? When do you tell, all that kind of stuff? Yeah, I geeked out on that a little bit in our conversation too. But I keep coming back to the thing that we probably all should reflect on is your point, which is the intent of the story. Not what am I telling, but why am I telling it? Like what am I trying to achieve, either for me or for my audience? And sometimes I think those intentions probably should should be investigated a little bit more. Right to your point, it's like, is this and I catch myself all this time. It's like, why am I? Is it just to get attention? Is that really it? And and by the way, is that a good thing or bad thing, or is it neither? Is it just sort of neutral? Or is it to get affirmation? Is it to get confirmation? Is it because your intent can actually impact the story itself. If I'm trying to get affirmation, I might tell a story in a different way and put a certain spin on it that's going to lead to affirmation, more likely get me the affirmation that I seek, and becomes almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, rather than getting me a critical expertise, a critical feedback that would actually be more valuable. I'm literally making this up as I go, Shari, but
Yeah,
you triggered a bunch of stuff I'm thinking about I've never thought about before, really.
No, you're so right. And I thought you brought up a great comment about, it's not just the information, it's how do we make people feel. And the one place I'm not as aligned with Rod, and probably for his work, what he's doing makes a ton of sense. I know in my work, we have done master classes with everyone from Microsoft to Ford, and even in Fortune 500s, everybody, including the CEO, they think they're telling a good story, and they're not.
Yeah.
And
why not?
Well, to me, it's less about delivery. That happens second. And it is all about structure. And that's where and there's pattern recognition in a good story. And yes, you can use it for good or you can use it for evil. But I'm thinking of a CEO I just worked with. We've done master classes for the company on storytelling, but his story, he was the hero. He was incredible. He was awesome. He defied all odds. Now, there's a structure, and you mentioned it earlier, that the audience or the customer needs to be the hero of the story. And he needs to understand, and maybe we don't want to use the word structure, but it's a universal truth of psychology that if you are, and it's no different than sales. If I start with my decks and how great our company is and how long we've been in business, right away, I don't like you because you're beating your chest. And it's the same with the story. And that's just one of 20 examples of default behaviors that I see. And I do think that the universal truth, or the structure, whatever you want to call it, once you tell that to the person and say, hey, look, here's why it doesn't work. And here's why it would be better if you were flawed. I mean, it may be old school, but you were flawed. But then somebody came to you, the guide gave you an idea, And then I watch the transformation, and it's unbelievable. All of a
I
sudden,
agree.
they're telling,
Yeah.
a good story that people actually want to hear.
And I think to your point, you say structure, I say intention. I think they're both true, right? So um, can I give you a self-serving example just because it's something we talk about that I've been thinking about a lot. So it's in the
Are
book,
you
The
the
Framing
hero
Field.
in your own story?
No, I promise I'm not because I never know what the heck I'm talking about. But so we talk about frame making as a mindset, and this mindset is how can I help my customers make the best decision they can in as little time as possible. That's really what frame making is all about. And to your point, it's something you just said again. You sparked so many ideas today, which is, you always do because you're amazing. But is this idea that I can tell a story to a customer. It's very, very compelling. But if my intention is to get them to like me or see my value or to think more or to think, we're like, wow, he's great. He's now my trusted advisor. We tend to solve for people's perceptions of us in telling stories. And if you just switch your intent, what if I switch my intent from changing the way you think about me in telling the story to I'm going to tell you a story specifically designed to change the way you think of yourself? Then the story itself, the structure, the content, the cadence, all of it begins to shift as well. Certainly the content does. And I think it's a really, I think, powerful point to begin to think like before I start telling stories, what am I trying to accomplish? Like, what's my objective? Like and that really, then you could take all the tools from your storytelling toolbox and bring them to bear on achieving that goal. But until you really rethink that, because is that kind of consistent with what you're talking about? Is the
Yeah,
I can
exactly.
be a great storytelling sales rep, but if it's like at the service of just getting you to love me more, you love my product more, it's probably still not very compelling.
Well,
Is it?
and that's why we need to ask, why am I telling this story? And
Why
and
am I
I
telling
I
this story?
actually, again, as a framework, begin with the
Yeah,
punchline. And I call it a
yeah,
punchline because the way I look at it, a great story is like a joke. And the punchline has to be like a tweetable that people remember. And I
mm,
will have companies start with the punchline and work
mm,
backwards. I'm doing a
I
keynote
like it.
for Hertz next week, and I have a
Hmm.
very funny story about not using a Hertz because I've been a Hertz member now for 40 years. And in an
Yeah,
attempt to save money, we used a different service. But I had to start with the punchline
yeah,
and work backwards. And I do think that's really important because if we don't know why we're telling it, we're doing it to make Hertz the hero, not to
right.
make us the hero. We've
Yeah,
got to get very clear on that. Otherwise, we're going to go all different places that we really shouldn't be going. So yes,
agreed. And this goes
I
back to
think
the point
that's
about
true.
the stories we tell ourselves too. Start with intent. There you go.
Yes,
I think what
absolutely.
we've just done is we've just solved the world's problems.
You think so?
No,
No, there's still
but
really
that was super
nasty
interesting.
stories out there, and we could go
Yeah,
on and on about
yeah,
this, but
yeah.
um, yeah, it is interesting, and it
It's
is
really interesting.
interesting how hungry people are
Yeah,
and corporations and media is for stories, which is weird because media has been telling stories for years. It's just that now they're very bifurcated. So
100%. All right, we'll keep the story going. Until next time.
we'll talk story
Cheers.
next time.
That's right.
Thanks, Brent.